Ron, welcome to the show. Mate, you were Minister of Defence. Why didn't you replace them when you were Minister of Defence if they're so crappy?
Jesus, Michael, were you asleep? And I only bought P8s at $2.4 billion, and I only bought Hercules, the 5 new Hercules to replace the 60-year-old Hercules. It had cost $1.2 billion, and I only bought a truckload of Bushmaster armoured vehicles and bought a new farm to expand the Haki Air Base, and got the biggest injection of CapEx into the Defence Force in 2 years flat.
Well, then why didn't you buy some 257s that worked then, Ron? Seriously, what's the matter?
You can't do everything in 3 years, mate, and I didn't get re-elected, or that job would have been done as well, along with a new Southern Ocean Patrol vessel and marine helicopters. But there you go. I mean, Michael, what you're looking at is the result of successive governments kicking the can on major defence procurement because it's never popular. No one ever wants defence until they have to have it. You can't magic it up out of a tin can. You just can't. And, when government's successive, Labor National goes on and on and on, beating the can down the road, saying, we'll do it then, and we'll do it then, they never do it. And that's why these aircraft are not 20 years old, Michael. They were 10 years old when they were bought. They were introduced into service in 2003. And so they're 30 years old.
Okay.
And, and they're old, and they break down. That's it. And if you buy an aircraft or you buy a piece of equipment, and at the time you buy it, you slap on it, and Treasury endorses this, all the papers go to Treasury, if you slap on it a whole of life expectation and you build all your costs around that, and then you expand it by another 5 years, by another 10 years, by another 15 years, and the Hercules ended up being in service 30 years longer than projected. Well, that's ridiculous. And you can't, Yeah,
but why do we need them? Okay, but why do you need 757s? Can't the New Zealand Prime Minister and a trade delegation get on a commercial flight and just fly to Japan?
Well, it's like separating out the different roles, and you're quite right. You've been on the website and you've seen the different missions at 75. The 757s are a strategic airlift capability for deployments and for resupply missions. And one of the biggest jobs they do is resupply Antarctica. And they do that very, very capably, along with the Hercules.
What, you mean they actually land at Antarctica, Ron?
Yes, they do.
I didn't know that.
And so, Antarctica has always been our biggest military deployment. And we have frigates, and we have APVs, and we have Hercules, and we have 757s, and hundreds of Defence Force people down there enabling scientists to do the work they do. Without the Defence Force, scientists wouldn't be able to do anything. And so, but it costs money, and so no one's wanted to address that issue. I think Jerry Brownlee had a poke at it when he was the Minister of Defence, and was looking at buying a C-17. But you're quite right. What needs to happen is the people of New Zealand need to understand that these aircraft are used for multi-role. They are used for strategic airlift capability. They are used to take the Prime Minister and all of the media, all of the media who go with him on these trade delegations, plus all the key business people that, the government feels are important to our trade relationships internationally and our gross domestic product and our wealth. So we take all these people offshore to do our pitch to get better trading circumstances, situations, and to make the country wealthier. And whether people like it or not, that's reality. It doesn't matter who's in government, that's what you have to do. The question really is, Michael, around, what's the appropriate platform? There are times, I know, when we could have put a Prime Minister and a small delegation into a Learjet and flying them off to Australia or Singapore, do the job they had to do and get them back again quite efficiently. But you try mentioning to the voting public that you're going to buy a Learjet for the Defence Force, people get up in arms and they spit and they carry on and they don't vote for the people. So politicians avoid those uncomfortable decisions or those conversations, and you end up where you are right now.
So what you're really saying is that there is a sort of not so benign negativism from the New Zealand public to spending any money on defence, full stop.
You're absolutely on point, Michael, until Cyclone Gabrielle hits, until you have massive fires, until you have a massive earthquake in Christchurch. Then everyone expects the Defence Force to turn up in their tens of thousands. We don't have tens of thousands of Defence Force people. We are a very small Defence Force, and we're bleeding personnel because they feel they're underpaid and undervalued. And one of the reasons they feel they're undervalued is because they don't get the right kit when they need it.
No, okay, fair enough. So we're also not a rich country, as you'd be depressingly obvious now. The 757s, I'll tell you where I relied upon the information from, that they were 20 years old. That came from the current Defence Minister, Judith Collins. That's what she said yesterday. You're pointing out, no, in actual fact, we've had them for 20 years, but they were 10 years old to start with, which is interesting news. But having said that, planes like this should be still flying, shouldn't they, Ron, if you've got the best engineering advice that you can?
One of the things we're very, very fortunate about to have, Michael, is a military trade training, engineer training system that used to be the envy of the world across New Zealand. I mean, in the days when you had Ministry of Works and Railways and everybody in the post office was turning out thousands of apprentices, highly trained engineers. And the military is probably the only organisation that's still doing that. We have highly competent people. That's why aircraft like the P8, the P3s and the C-130s flew for almost 60 years. But when you start getting into the issues around corrosion and electrolysis and panels actually corroding, because that's what happens when aluminium, aviation aluminium, don't ask me the metallurgy.
Understood.
Correct term. But when you have metal starting to fail, you suddenly find your servicing regimes, which might have been weeks long in the early days, are now months long. I think the servicing that one of the aircraft's undergoing is a 3-month service now. That is what happens when aircraft get that old. You can engineer, and we've done it. I've actually seen duct tape used on helicopters operationally. You can do whatever you have to gerrymander to get a bird flying in operational circumstances. But when you put the Prime Minister and the top business leaders and cabinet, and dare I say it, the highly professional New Zealand media on board from out of the parliamentary gallery, the last thing you can afford is for that plane to go down. So there is no scope, no room for running risk. And if something's gone down, a light's come on, a problem's occurred, that's it. You're not going to fly that bird, and you're not going to jeopardise people's lives. Soldiers, we'll jump into a Hercules and fly into Afghanistan and go down between the mountains and duck and dive and bob. We put on our helmets, put on our vests, and cross your fingers and say your Hail Mary, and in you go. But you don't do that with the Prime Minister of the country, and you don't do that with the business leaders, and you don't do that normally. That's unacceptable. There are aviation standards, and the Air Force do it.
Yep, so given that there is a history now, and a sad history of breakdowns of those Boeing 757s taking the Prime Minister and all those august individuals overseas, do you just say, sell the 757s, get rid of them, or do you keep on trying to prop up something that's not working?
They got no choice right now, Michael, because my cabinet paper I took up on the P8s. I took in 2017, 2018. The last of the P8s arrived in New Zealand last year. So you're talking 6 years. 4 to 6 years to replace a capability of that type. But there are options that I would hope that they're looking at, and separate out the functions. A trade delegation could go in a chartered Air New Zealand aircraft, but you have to ensure that you have all the security that you need, diplomatic protection that you need on board that aircraft, and that aircraft is operating within the parameters that security advisors and DP say it should, because it's got the Prime Minister and it's got these other people on board. So the security considerations, which are 757.